all in English, to switch over to our slides, because we do not only have our beautiful faces here. So thanks again. In case you want to follow up later, I think we have all the information up here on that initial slide deck. Jürgen, your name, your LinkedIn, my stuff. Really, the two of us, we will talk about Keptn today. Title is Oh Keptn, My Keptn, a data-driven way to DevOps and SRE automation. Besides the links, I mean, really do us a favor, just check out what we do. You can follow us on Twitter if you happen to be on Twitter. Check us out on GitHub. Give us a star if you like. And if you want to join the conversation, I think the best way is really to check out the Slack channel. And obviously, another great point to start is the website. Anything we missed, Jürgen? I think that's pretty much a good start.
That's pretty much it. So if you just remember keptn.sh, I will also drop it in the chat. You will also find everything there, and yeah, you will find your way from there. And we will guide you through the whole thing in the next, like, let's say 45 minutes, more or less.
Exactly. And we go a little bit back and forth, so we have a combination of slides and then some live demo, but let's not wait longer. The way we've organized the talk is we have 3 acts. First of all, what is Keptn? We want to show you the key use cases and who is adopting it. Second one is why we built Keptn, because you may think yet another tool that I don't know what it's doing, or there's other tools out there that solve similar problems. So we want to tell you what problems we actually solve and why we think we are different than maybe some other tools you know. And then the next thing is how Keptn works. What's the architecture like? How can you extend it? So hopefully this gives you then more confidence also that Keptn is a good choice and time well spent if you look at it. Now let's get started. What is Keptn? Keptn for me is an open, event and data-driven automation platform for DevOps and SRE use cases. I know this sounds like somebody in marketing came up with it, but let me explain how I see the world. What Keptn does, it allows you to orchestrate through an event model, multi-stage delivery on one side. So these are typically the DevOps use cases. And we heard this in the morning in the keynote, if you remember. It's important to orchestrate your delivery pipeline, deploy, test, validate, release across multiple stages. But Keptn is not just there to orchestrate the delivery. And this is, I think, one of the uniquenesses. Keptn can also orchestrate your what we call day 1 and day 2 operations, rolling out your canaries in a safe way, or if there's problems in production, then Keptn can assess the situation. So if you get an alert in from Prometheus or from your Azure monitoring, then Keptn can assess the situation, and then based on the problem, can trigger different tasks like a rollback, a scale up, validate if the problem goes away, maybe go into a loop until all the options that you've given it are executed, and then hopefully the problem goes away, then everything is good. If not, escalate. Now, again, you may think, well, this is just another if then do this, or if this then do this tool, but actually it's not, because at the very core is the validate piece. We have seen a lot of organizations trying to include observability at the core of what they're doing, or actually trying to include observability and integrating it with the delivery pipelines or with their incident management. And we actually took this as a chance to build observability at the core of what Keptn actually does. So what Keptn does, it makes data-driven decisions based on SLOs, service level objectives. If you again remember in the keynote speaker was already talking about SLIs and SLOs and SLAs. So we have this at the core. What we do, Keptn automatically connects to your observability platform. These are the 3 logos. We started with Prometheus, then we added Dynatrace. The community recently built a Datadog integration, but in the end, it's really up to you what type of observability platform you want to connect. But the most important thing is, and this is now on the top, Keptn is not a tool that does a deployment, that does testing, that does notify. It orchestrates by connecting to your existing tools that you already have. So you take and keep the tools that you have, or you pick the tools that you want to work with, and then Keptn connects them through the orchestration engine that is data-driven, and it connects them through an open event standard. So the events, you will see them later also in the demo, are so-called CD events. They are based on cloud events, but cloud events is another CNCF project. On top of that, we are currently working with the Continuous Delivery Foundation to standardize the way we are interacting and communicating with other tools. Because a big challenge we have seen is, if you look at 2 or 3 different deployment tools or 2 or 3 different testing tools, they all deploy, they all test, but they all have their own proprietary API, which means you always need to build and maintain custom tool-to-tool integrations. And by standardizing the way we are communicating with these types of tools, we want to solve this big pain, to be honest with you, as well, besides putting data at the core and then orchestrating. So at the real core, right, I think one of the key differentiators is our SLO-based evaluation. You will see this later in the demo, but so that you get a little more background and context, when Keptn does a so-called evaluation task, it actually internally talks with the so-called Lighthouse Service, right? The Lighthouse is kind of giving you a clear go or no-go. If you think about, ships, obviously, with Keptn, we just picked another nautical term from the Kubernetes community. But the Lighthouse Service is a core component of Keptn. It is looking at a so-called SLO YAML file, which means the SLO YAML is something you put in the Git repository that Keptn keeps for your automation projects. And in that SLO YAML, you specify what type of SLIs, so what type of indicators, metrics, you expect to have a certain pass or warning criteria, right? It's kind of your definition of health. And so this is just the definition of objectives in order to get those metrics, because if you look at the error rate, JVM memory, count DB calls, there's no indication how you get this data, because we separated the concerns between what you expect from a certain metric versus how you get the metric. How to get the metric is handled by what we call an SLI provider. That means you have one or multiple SLI providers in your system. And then if, let's say, you're using Prometheus, and then Keptn is reaching out to Prometheus and say, hey, give me the metrics. And by the way, the queries for these indicators are specified in the SLI YAML. So here are just two examples, right? SLI YAML for Prometheus, one for Dynatrace. For Prometheus, it would be PromQLs. For Dynatrace, the metrics query language. And for whatever other tool you have, whatever query language that tool supports. Point is, these tools then return the individual data points, which is then fed back to the Lighthouse Service, and the Lighthouse Service takes these data points and then comparing it against the objectives. It is rating every objective and then comes up with a total score. So let's see this actually in action, because we are not only paid for doing PowerPoint programming, as I like to say, right, Jürgen? Unless you are paid for PowerPoint programming. Not just.
But it's always good to see if something works.
Exactly.
And you will do the proof now.
I hope so. I'll do my best. So if you want to get started, I just put up Keptn SH. I think that's a great way to get started, because you get all the information about what is Keptn, the docs community, and so on. But what is Keptn? I have Keptn here. You can see Keptn is organized in so-called projects. So I have a delivery demo, I have a demo rollout, DevOps tools, and release validation. So you organize Keptn in projects. I want to start with my release validation project, because this is also one of the core use cases that people start with, which is actually this SLO-based evaluation. So I have here we call this sequences, right? Every time you want to trigger, you want to ask Keptn to execute a sequence of tasks, you trigger a so-called sequence. And I can see here the overview of my sequences that I ran. This is the most simplest sequence that you can have Keptn execute. And you can actually see here, I triggered this this morning. When I trigger a sequence from the outside, what I basically do, I send in an event. So Keptn not only internally uses standardized events to communicate with different tools, also for you to call Keptn or trigger Keptn from your existing tool, let's say from Azure DevOps, you want to trigger Keptn to do an evaluation like I'm showing here. You just send in this particular cloud event, where you basically say, I want to trigger the evaluation sequence in my production stage. Here's some project context. This is the project we're in. Behind the project or underneath the project, there's services and there's also stages. You can add in additional labels. This is metadata. And for certain tasks, you can also add in, for instance, the start and the end timestamp for the evaluation that you want Keptn to execute. So you trigger it. And then the nice thing is what you see here, Keptn is running through the steps. We call them tasks. And for every task, again, is sending an event that a certain task has to be executed. And then a particular tool picks it up. Like the Lighthouse Service, I explained this earlier. This is the core tool that comes with Keptn that does the evaluation. And then it reaches out to your observability platform, also, again, through events. It's all the same concepts, all standard events. Now, what I really like is the visualization here. So this is kind of the heat map I talked about earlier. Every time I run an evaluation, I basically say, Keptn, evaluate, my SLIs and SLOs that I've specified for a particular time frame. And then what Keptn really does, it reaches out, as I said, to the observability platform. In my case, it's Dynatrace, pulls in all the metrics. Every metric, we call it an SLI, gets evaluated against the SLO, the criteria. Then you get a green, yellow, or red rating. And then we are calculating and kind of aggregating it up to a total score on the top. You can see it here. I can also scroll down a little bit. You can see the actual values that are pulled back in, right? So in my case, I have different metrics ranging from average failure rate to memory usage. What else do I have? Disk. So I can actually pull in metrics from all sorts of layers of your stack, and I can define pass and warning criteria, either absolute values. So I can say I want to be faster than 100 milliseconds. I don't want memory to exceed a certain level, but you can also do absolute value changes. So for instance, I can say here, the failure rate should not increase by more than 5%, meaning to the previous builds. So it's really cool and really flexible on what we have here. Behind the scenes, and this is what's very important, I always say behind every project, there's a strong backend, and the backend in my case is actually a Git repository. So behind every automation project, we have a Git repository that is also organized in a similar way, where you have the main branch, where you actually specify initially, and you will hear me talk about this later, the so-called shipyard file that defines your sequences. What we also have here for every stage, like I have a production stage, this is where you then have your additional data that is specific for that stage and for that service. So in the example I showed earlier, the actual definition of the SLI and the SLO is in a subdirectory called AAPL service. Now let me quickly go back to my Keptn. Remember, I had release validation. That was my project. Within that project, I have services, AAPL service. That's one of my demo services I use for workshops. And then in here, I now have my specific configuration. So for instance, here is my YAML file that specifies all these criteria. All right. So everything is version controlled. And as Keptn does its thing and interacts with the different tools, these tools also have access to these files that are version controlled. I want to show you one more thing. There's a couple of other things we can do. I have a demo rollup project here. And this project I actually kicked off. I kicked off a sequence before we started. This shows kind of like the multi-stage orchestration capabilities of Keptn. Every time I look into the UI, it always in the beginning gives me a view of what we always thought is important for an owner that wants to automate things around a service or an application. This is why this service view always gives me the overview of the latest evaluation. So every time you are orchestrating a delivery or auto remediation or pushing canaries out, you always get to this view where you see the heat map. We call this the heat map, the evaluation heat map. Behind the scenes, remember, delivery sequence. So in this case, I have a delivery sequence that does a little bit more than just evaluation. And as I said, I kicked this off earlier in preparation to this talk. Andy, while prepping for Global Azure Austria, I kicked off the delivery. It actually executed a couple of tasks. Monaco actually configures my monitoring. So Monaco stands for monitoring as code. Then I did a deployment. Here I'm deploying on my Kubernetes cluster using Helm. Then I have a validate stage. I can use things like a generic job executor that executes, in my case, a Python script that just validates if the deployment endpoints are available. Then I have a release stage. Here I'm using Argo, which is a very popular framework to do blue-green deployments. And you can see here, this is really, it's combining a lot of different tools. Now, this is the staging stage. And at the very end, what I added was a so-called approval task. Approval task means I can say, I want, before the process continues, somebody to approve that we can actually go on. We have options of manual and automated approval, but I just click here quickly on, I approve this because this is now my build that should run through. And now the next step that should happen, it should go from staging over once the UI refreshes and continues another sequence in production. So let's see, prod is just coming in. Here we go. Now it's going into prod. It starts with the deployment. Same thing as before. Behind every automation project, there is a Git repository, which means in that Git repository, same as before, in the master branch or main branch, I have my shipyard file. Now this shipyard file is a little bit more elaborate than the one we saw earlier. You can see here, we are grouping things by stages, and behind the stages or underneath we have sequences. So here I have my delivery sequence in staging, where I want Keptn to orchestrate Monaco, then deployment, then validate, then release, then test, and evaluate, and so on. I also have a rollback sequence that will be triggered if my staging delivery finished with the test result fail. So there's a lot of cool things I can do here. And what you will notice, this is just the declaration of what we call a sequence of a workflow. Call it like that if you want to. There is no tooling definition of which tool should actually do what, because this is all done through an event mechanism, through event subscriptions. Now, more to this later. For me, the most important thing is that you saw we are not just a tool that does deployment or does one thing. We can orchestrate many different tools. We can connect to your existing tools. And at the heart, we are pulling data from your observability platform to always make data-driven and data-informed decisions on how we are continuing with those sequences. All right, so this was it for the first demo. Let's see if we have more time later. But Jürgen, I think I want to hand it over to you, because I think people want to know who is adopting Keptn actually.
Sure, thanks. So that was a lot in a really short amount of time. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We are happy to follow up also later. But a couple of things that Andy already mentioned, like it has so many things that are relevant for actual large enterprises. And the first adoption story we want to share today is from an Austrian online banking software. We have the logo also here. They are actually also based in Linz. I'm mentioning Linz because like Global Azure was very much originating in Linz, but it's a very local and nice story. So what they are heavily using, and if you want, you can reveal all the bullet points already, because they are also using this SLO and SLI evaluation. We can see here all the SLOs defined. A lot of them, they are, for example, directly going for a response time or number of database calls. And some of them, they are weighted in the sense that they are more important for Raiffeisen to release the software. Some of them, they are just mainly for informational purposes. So with this kind of combination, they are building their own quality gate, and Keptn, the quality gate part of Keptn, can then give them a final score. And if the score is not green, they have to check this release, and this release is not allowed to go into production. So how they are calling this quality gate is actually they are triggering this from Jenkins. They have a large tool pipeline already. They cannot afford to change all the tooling, but what they want to have is a very mature quality gating, and they are triggering this from Jenkins. So you have from Jenkins, you can jump into the Keptn, to the dashboard. You can have a look here on the heat map, and from this heat map, you can jump back to Jenkins and have a look at which exact build is actually causing a failed release or was a satisfying release. So very nice, cool, and integrated into what they already have. So in the next example, we're actually sharing a little bit more how they, our friends from, I think Bert is from the Netherlands or Belgium, some of this.
Belgium, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Belgium, yeah. So Bert van der Heyden, he was, his task was to integrate also this quality evaluation part into a completely different set of tools. They are using for load testing JMeter for the version control and automation. They are heavily based on Azure DevOps, and they so now integrating the whole quality gates of Keptn into Azure DevOps. They have put together the whole engineering work, and they were actively contributing back to Keptn. So you will find this also in the Keptn GitHub repository. You can make use of these integrations, and thanks to the integration that they built, they could really speed up the delivery and also reduce a lot of manual work. Because what we saw, this manual work, just remember the demo that Andy showed, you have a lot of different SLOs, and all of them are checked automatically. And all these API calls that you usually have to think of how to query data from Prometheus or from the Azure Monitor, this is done behind the scenes. So you can define it once, but you can think of this as like a library that you can use, and you define it. Also switching or having different monitoring solutions in different stages, for example, you don't have to change your SLOs. So really cool work that Bert did, and he was also presenting this at one of the Keptn community meetings if you want to learn more. Another part that we have is coming back to what Andy said earlier, not only the deployment, but actually more a deployment in the sense of having it enterprise ready with blue-green deployments, or in this case with canary deployments. So with canary, you would not just use the new version instead of the old version, but you will gradually increase the traffic to the new version, but only if the new version is really satisfying the SLOs and not breaking any quality criteria. So you can also see the whole tool chain here. They are building their own CD pipeline with Keptn, again, all defined in the shipyard file, and then they are connecting the tools. So the actual deployment is done with Argo, then the tests are run with JMeter. They will fetch the data from Dynatrace, and then depending if it's fine or not, they can increase more traffic or just roll back, or basically roll back or stop the traffic shift from the old version to the newer version. And one last story that we want to share is actually a story that is not so much related with deployment from a new version, but if something is already running in production, we all know it's like there will be some issues sometime. So we cannot guarantee that the software is free from issues. So what is another strength from Keptn in the day? I think, Andy, you called it day 1 and day 2 operations. It's really listening or reacting to some triggers. And this can be from Prometheus or Dynatrace or Azure Monitor. So each kind of, let's say, a problem, a notification, an alert, this can be sent directly to Keptn. And remediation sequences are the ones that can then actively react on those alerts. So for Savitha and P&G, what they did is they are defining remediation sequences. So what remediation steps should be done when one specific alert is coming in. And the actual fix or the actions they want to do, they defined it as a Python script. And they will also take this Python script and commit it into the Git repository. So we saw this. Everything in Keptn lives in a Git repository that can be also connected to GitHub or Azure DevOps or other tools. The important part here that it's not living somewhere where you need to figure out where it is. It's all in the Git repository. Keptn will figure out which action should be executed. It can be Python scripts, it can be other scripts, it can be even jobs that can be run. And once the action is completed, Keptn will do another evaluation. So it can make sure if it actually fixed the problem or remediated the problem. Let's say it could toggle back a feature flag or just changing some configuration, or in this case, executing a Python script. And then Keptn will make sure in another evaluation to either escalate it or closing this alert or problem if it's actually remediated. So kind of diverse things what you can do with Keptn. All comes back to the shipyard file, basically. I'm not sure if the shipyard file is the next part, but I think on this point I'm handing back to you, and we will hear more.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the shipyard file is one thing, and also the whole evaluation is really important. The concept of SLIs and SLOs, and I just want to quickly also say here we are recognized by people like Tara. She's a performance engineer at Facebook, and he gave some really nice comments about that Keptn feels like a reference implementation of Google's SRE handbook. So I think we're definitely doing something that is needed, right? I think that's the great. We're solving a pain here. Now, why did we build Keptn? The reason why we built Keptn is, well, first of all, what we do, and I come back to what I said in the beginning, we are just calling different tools, right? That's what we do. And in the beginning, in the middle, we are making decisions based on data. So clearly, you can use whatever tool you have, whether it's Jenkins, Azure DevOps, any other Python script, any shell scripts. I just have to refer back to the keynote speaker. She said she's really fluent in PowerShell scripting. So obviously you can do all of this yourself. You can build scripts that call tool A, tool B, tool C, and nobody keeps you from doing that. However, one of the reasons why we think Keptn is actually necessary, because if you start building these pipelines and maintaining them, then you may end up with one of our early adopters from Keptn, Christian, where he maintained his pipelines that were doing exactly these things: deploy, test, evaluate. And the problem is, if you script all of this and then you have multiple permutations of it, right? This is a lot of custom script to maintain. And it's just like a lot of logic is in those custom scripts, and a lot of special knowledge about how to call a particular tool and how to wait, how to get the results back. So this is one of the things. Also, we within Dynatrace, we are just kind of the same, which is the software organization like all of you are out there. Dieter, he was tasked to figure out, how can we get from a more monolithic deployment to a microservice deployment, and what would we actually use for deployment. So in Dynatrace itself, we have a lot of experience with Jenkins. So Jenkins was kind of our first choice. And after coming up with the first, let's say, microservice deployment Jenkins pipeline, it soon turned out the more services we onboarded, they had their own little flavors of what testing tool and what notification tool and what deployment tool. So we ended up with a couple of permutations. And I think the snowflake effect is really what we experienced. What we also then did is we did a code analysis on the pipeline code itself, and we found a high level of code duplication and code complexity, which means we have the same problems in our pipeline code than a lot of our engineers have in our regular code. And this is something we need to address. And this is where, right, the conclusion for me is, on the left side, yes, it works, but it doesn't scale. It's hard. And we wanted to provide just a different approach. And this is also why I think we were sitting, it was like a couple of years ago, we started with the whole thing. But I want to actually give it back to Jürgen to explain a little bit when we started and how we started. But we clearly needed a new approach to automation because it was just painful. And Jürgen, I think you have a nice slide that kind of encapsulates everything.
Yeah, I think the important part is really that you just mentioned it, and it really brings it to the point that just yet another automation, it would be just yet another tool that you have and where you can do automation. So we had a lot of concepts back then at Dynatrace. So we had a lot of concepts, a lot of working code, and we decided in 2019 to put this concept into one code base and open sourcing it. So it wasn't, in the very, very beginning, it was not a CNCF project, but since we have done the initial commits, we have provided the first code base, we have then submitted it as a project to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Because what we really think is that it's not a project from one company, but it's really a community project, and it should really kind of influence how others can do it, in not building their own glue code ever and ever again, but really providing one code base and one base where you can just connect your tools. And Andy mentioned in the beginning, it's based on other standards such as cloud events or CD events. So this is really the kind of breaking point where you can now have one tool or one orchestration where you can connect other tools. And providing it to the cloud native community actually gave also a huge boost for the project. So we can see here, it's the GitHub stars. It really boosted when we submitted it to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It was accepted first as a kind of a standard project, then moving on to the sandbox, which gave us already the possibility to mentoring new contributors and then bringing new contributors back to Keptn. Also, it gave us more visibility by speaking at KubeCon, for example, also expanding our user base and bringing more and more integrations into Keptn and building integrations together with the CNCF community. So right now we are in the incubation process. To be honest, I think it's going really well. So Keptn is doing really good. And as we've seen also a couple of slides earlier, there are a lot of large organizations already using Keptn in their production environments. So I think that's also one of the key points. It's an open source project, but being used in large organizations, that really kind of proves that these kind of open source projects provide great value to the community and also to organizations. And there is a link here to a blog article that kind of summarizes our journey a little bit. So if you're interested, you will find it also online.
Cool. Really impressive, actually, what happened in just 3 years, right? If you look at it, really nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we will be at KubeCon Valencia in 2 weeks. And so in case anybody is going to be there, check us out. We will have not only a virtual booth, but we have a real booth there as well. So check us out. Now, I want to bring it up. I want to bring it home to act number 3, how Keptn works, even though you've seen the demo and we already did a lot of explanation. But let me remind you again. What we have done in the beginning, we looked at those classical automation scripts where in one big script, 1,000 lines and longer, I'm sure you have somewhere these Python scripts or these shell scripts or whatever scripting language you have lying around. The challenge with these scripts is they're great, they're flexible, but they have a lot of hard-coded tool integrations and sometimes even configuration in it. And our approach was, well, we need to break these barriers. We need to break up these monolithic automation scripts, and we need to separate the process definition that is actually in there from the tooling. And this is what we've done, right? So we have the process on the left, and then we are decoupling the tooling. Any configuration that you may have still lingering around somewhere in a file system or even in your automation scripts have to be moved to Git. Keptn holds a Git repository. And then to connect everything together, to connect the process orchestration, we call them sequences, to the actual tools, we're using Eventing, just as you would do in modern software engineering. So what that means, to give you an example, automated performance sequence. So on the left side, you would have a performance stage and maybe a sequence of deploy, test, and evaluate. On the right, you have different tools. And then there's different ways to trigger Keptn. You can send in, as I showed you in the demo, a so-called cloud event using the API. We also have a CLI, or what Jürgen mentioned, we even have Azure DevOps integrations, for instance. We have Jenkins integrations that behind the scenes, obviously, just make an API call. But if I say Keptn trigger performance in staging, and then I can give some additional metadata, like what the image is that should be deployed, then Keptn, we call it the shipyard controller, is looking at the first sequence or the first task, deploy. It sends that event off, and then you may have one or multiple tools that's subscribing to that event and then acting upon it. The tools are also reporting back to Keptn to say, I started, I'm taking the job, I'm taking the task, I started, I finished. So Keptn actually can keep track of the status. Once the deployment is done, then in this case, the test task would be executed again through an event, and you may have a testing tool. And then the key thing here, right, remember the evaluation. This is also why this is in a special color. The evaluation is core, where Keptn, again, through events, reaches out to the observability platforms, pulls in the data, and then scores everything, and then decides what to do next. The nice thing, what you can also see here, you can subscribe one tool or multiple tools to an event. A notification tool like Slack or any other notification tool is, for instance, a great one that you should subscribe to events. You want to say, push me a Slack message every time a deployment succeeded or when a test failed. So you can just subscribe to that event and send it off. We have a webhook service there as well, so to make these integrations very easy. We call the left side here a shipyard file. You've seen it earlier in the demo. So the shipyard is a sequence of tasks. Then we have the tools that you subscribe to Keptn. We call that the uniform. Then we have the config files in a configuration service in Git. And then we're using cloud events, as we said earlier. Second example, just to quickly run through, because I know we're getting short on time, but I think we still have enough time to go through them, and it's important. This would be a canary rollout example where I have prepare, deploy, evaluate, release. I may have different tools, right? I may have different deployment tools, different notification tools, but I say Keptn trigger, canary rollout, that's my sequence name, in production with particular metadata like the image. I didn't animate everything through, but you get the idea, right? Deploy will deploy, evaluate will evaluate, and then maybe you have a release that actually then does, let's say, the canary rollout for you. And to bring us to the one example we saw from Savitha, she was the one who was doing the auto remediation, very common use case, which means I have a remediation sequence. I have maybe different tools, obviously, right? If I want to orchestrate configuration changes like scaling up, scaling down, rolling back, making, and you may have your Terraform provider, whatever it is. So I have different tools here on the right. Now, the way I trigger this, I would say Keptn trigger remediation in production, and then you can give in specific problem and root cause information if your monitoring tool provides both. And the nice thing with this is we have an additional indirection here. While you could call just a sequence that has task 1, task 2, task 3, we have the additional indirection of a remediation YAML file where you can say, if a particular problem comes in with a particular root cause, then these are the actions to be executed. So it's really nice that you can have your SRE team specify kind of your runbooks. And then, right, like in this case, log disk latency was the root cause, high failure rate. The first action might be to clean the disk, and then you have different tools that are acting on it. Most important thing is Keptn is always evaluating. Did the problem go away? And this is just baked into the process. If everything is good, awesome, we're done. If not, it would then look into the remediation YAML to pick the next action. This might be a rollback. Sense the event, and you get the idea, and then evaluate. If everything is green, awesome. If not, and we're running out of actions, then the last point could always be escalate, where maybe escalate is creating a ticket in your ticketing system. So these were 3 use cases. To sum it up from my perspective, Keptn really brings opinionated cloud-native automation to all of your projects. And I say all because this does not only work for cloud-native. We have seen examples earlier with Jenkins and with even restarting VMs and stuff like this. So it can orchestrate any type of tool. But really, what we don't want you to build and invest in your own automation. First, have a look at Keptn. I always say, friends, don't let friends build their own automation. Friends suggest to friends that they should look at Keptn first. And I think this is what speaks to itself. I don't know, Jürgen, anything else you want to add to this? Maybe not. Jürgen, are you still there with me, or did I?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, I do have like a hardware a mute button, and I did this, so I actually need also auto remediation here, so that if some alert comes in, my mute button gets turned off. No, I just want to emphasize actually what you just said, and but just in different wording. A lot of the pipeline code is actually technical debt, and also like what we've seen in the beginning, pipelines with more than 1,000 lines of code, they are all working, but you have a lot of things hard coded, and whenever you want to change maybe just a version of a dependency, or maybe you want to switch from one tool to the other, if everything is hard coded, you will really have a hard time to separate the process and the tooling. And that's what is basically also one of the foundations of Keptn. It's already, I would say, also from what we've heard today, it's enterprise ready in the sense that everything is directly in Git. So the whole idea also from the keynote and other talks today, infrastructure as code, but also configuration as code. So it's like everything as code. You have it as code in your repository, and you can always have a look what is actually now, what is deployed, like what is my configuration. It's in Git, it's stored, and you will find it. Same goes with SLOs. It's not something that you can have a look in the UI, but it's defined as a declarative way. You don't have to figure out like if a SLO is breaking, it's not because someone messed up with an API call, but because it's actually everything is, so to say, more standardized. And with this sense, since it's standardized, and also our events are standardized, you can easily connect the tools. We saw a lot of the eventing in the slides from Andy, but that's not the part that you have to do. This is already done. So the events, you can subscribe to those events, and you can send events to different tools. But a lot of the integrations, like sending events to Slack and even interacting with the Slack bot with Keptn, this is already done either by the Keptn core team or by the community. And the Keptn core team is just the team that is working more or less full-time on Keptn, but it's open source. You can easily join the development. You will find the roadmap. You will find everything that's coming in the next couple of months. You will find it on GitHub. Again, keptn.sh is where you can find it. It's really kind of bring this back to the whole idea. It's not replacing all of your tools, but it's exactly what Andy said. We don't want to have friends doing the same work that we've already done at Keptn.
Cool. Yeah, I also think that, you know, this is to reiterate, and you said it nicely, right? I mean, it's enterprise ready, even though we obviously still have ways to go. There's many features we still have on the plate. There's a lot of activities going on right now with role-based access control. There's stuff going on around high availability, around zero downtime upgrades. I think the next big move will come once we come to a conclusion with the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation, to really standardize on all these events. Because Jürgen, as you said, right, everybody can just subscribe to these events, but these events are still new for many tools. This is why right now we either give you a webhook option where you can kind of translate our event to whatever API, but for others, we are building, or you have to build a so-called Keptn service that kind of translates that event. But once we have a standard, we hope that all the tool vendors will kind of implement it. And we already have a couple of tool vendors that are part of that CD events group. And I think that's great.
Yeah. And I think that's also part of the whole open source idea. We saw it's originated in 2019, and now we have 2022, and we have come a long way. So being open source and actively listening to what the community is actually demanding, either they can contribute back to Keptn, or they can just by raising a pull request, or they can open an issue and the community can discuss what is the next important part, where should this project go. So there is a lot of drive also from the community and by influencing this project. And influencing and contributing does not only mean writing code, but it can mean contributing to documentation, can be in all sorts of different ways. Exactly.
Cool. So Jürgen, then to bring it home, I want to just conclude with my last slide. I'm reaching out to you, whoever you are that is listening. You might be a dev, you might be an ops, you might be an SRE, you might be whoever you are. But what you can do is pick your use case. There's different use cases because Keptn is really a general purpose orchestration tool that has the data at the core. So you can do things what we've shown to you, like the evaluation, delivery, self-healing, auto-remediation, whatever it is. So pick your use case, bring your configuration. You learn about shipware and SLIs and SLOs today, but there's also configuration from your individual tools, like your load testing scripts, your runbooks. Connect your tools. That's important, right? We are connecting your tools. We're not replacing them. We keep your investment, and then Keptn can automate the whole orchestration of connecting these tools through events, through SLIs. And yeah, that should save you hopefully a lot of work. So check it out. And with this, I believe we're almost on time. Just a reminder again about how you can find us in case you have not found us yet. And yeah, Jürgen, I think.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We will be also around, I guess, we can see it in the Q&A session for this stage. We will be around if you have any questions. Again, if you want to learn anything about the project, keptn.sh, joining the Slack channel, and then finding all the information there. If you want to reach out on any other things, you will have also contact information here. It was a pleasure presenting together with you, Andy, and thanks to the whole global Azure community here. It was a pleasure also to be with you here today, and yeah, see you in the Q&A stage.
Yeah, sounds good. See you there.
Bye.